You may be wondering, where is James Franco? A few years ago, he was everywhere. Oscar nominations, box office hits, and viral comedies with his best friend, Seth Rogen. They were a team in front of the camera and behind it. But that all changed. What began as minor controversies slowly snowballed into serious allegations, the kind that don't just end careers, but destroy entire friendships. Because now, Seth has publicly distanced himself from James and moved on to other projects. So today we're diving into the question, did Seth Rogen betray his best friend, or was it the only option he had left? The truth, like their friendship, is complicated. James Franco wasn't easy to define. Whether he was trapped in 127 hours, soaring through New York as Harry Osborn, or playing himself in This Is the End, audiences were fascinated by him. But Franco's rise wasn't a solo act. It was deeply tied to Seth Rogen. From their first project together, Freaks and Geeks, their chemistry was instant. Over the years, they became more than just co-stars. They became a duo that audiences came to expect. Together, they built a formula, blending chaos, comedy, and controversy into something uniquely theirs. They weren't afraid to push the boundaries, and they proved that with their majorly controversial film, The Interview. In the movie, they both played two journalists tasked with assassinating North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. It was a comedy that triggered an actual international crisis. And I'm not even joking. The North Korean government called the film an act of war, and Sony was hacked by a group linked to the regime. Leaked emails, threats of violence, and cancelled theatrical releases followed it become one of the most controversial Hollywood releases ever.
People we knew were getting fired over it. The head of the studio got fired essentially because of it. It really caused seismic shifts in Hollywood at the time.
Yet, despite the chaos, Franco and Rogen stood by each other. They publicly defended the film, joked about the backlash, and leaned into the storm together. The controversy around The Interview showed that they didn't shy away from pushing to the extreme in the name of comedy, and it made millions. The films they made together brought in over $300 million at the global box office. But even at the height of their success, the cracks had already started to show. In 2014, a 17-year-old Scottish girl named Lucy met Franco outside his Broadway play of Mice and Men. She posted a picture with him on Instagram, and shortly after, he slid into her DMs. He asked her how old she was. She said nearly 18. Still, Franco kept going, asking where she was staying, if she had a boyfriend, and whether he should rent a room. She got suspicious and asked him to prove he was really James Franco. So he did, by sending a selfie holding a piece of paper with her name on it. She never met up with him, but after showing the DMs to her friends, the conversation leaked and the internet had caught fire. And quickly after, James appeared on a talk show to address the controversy, blaming the tricky nature of social media.
Just a model of, how social media is tricky. It's a way people meet each other today. But what I've learned, I guess just because I'm new to it, it's like you don't know who's on the other end. So I use bad judgment, and I learned my lesson.
Legally, nothing happened. The age of consent in New York is 17 and 16 in Scotland, but it gave people an opportunity to point at James Franco and finally say, this guy's a creep. However, when Seth Rogen joked about it on SNL, it gave people a reason to move on, to treat it like a one-off mistake rather than something worth looking into.
To prank James Franco, I posed as a girl on Instagram. Told him I was way young. He seemed unfazed. I have a date to meet him at the Ace Hotel.
Seth was able to turn something uncomfortable into something kind of funny, a weird story that everyone can move on from. However, that 2014 incident wasn't the end of it, because in January 2018, James Franco walked the Golden Globes red carpet wearing a black Time's Up pin, as a public show of solidarity with the Me Too movement. That night, he won Best Actor in Comedy or Musical for The Disaster Artist, a film he directed and starred in alongside his brother Dave Franco and Seth Rogen. It was based on a real-life story behind the cult classic The Room. It truly looks like a career-defining moment, the kind that cements your place in Hollywood, but to some watching at home, it felt like pure hypocrisy. One of them was actress Ali Sheedy. That night she tweeted, "James Franco just won. Please never ask me why I left the film/TV business." Franco didn't disappear. Just days later, he appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert and then Late Night with Seth Meyers to address the allegations head on.
The things that I heard that were on Twitter are not accurate, but I completely support people coming out and being able to have a voice because they didn't have a voice for so long. Well, the ones I read were not accurate, but one of the things that I've learned is that this is a conversation that obviously needs to be had. There are women and others who I truly believe, and why I was wearing the pin is that they need to be a part of this conversation. So I support that.
The response was mixed, but surprisingly not entirely negative. Some praised him for showing up, for facing the moment instead of vanishing behind lawyers and press releases. To some, that looks like accountability, to others, carefully rehearsed damage control. And just days later, the Los Angeles Times published an article that turned vague online claims into something far more serious. Multiple women, most of them former students from Franco's acting school, accused him of inappropriate behaviour or sexually exploitative behaviour. Sarah Tiffer Kaplan, one of the most vocal accusers, said she was asked to appear in a burner scene in one of Franco's low-budget films, an unscripted orgy scene where Franco allegedly removed protective guards during simulated sex acts. Another accuser, Violet, was not a student but someone Franco mentored. She claimed he pressured her into a sexual act during an early stage of their relationship, something she says she agreed to out of fear he would lose interest or turn cold. On paper, it all sounded very disturbing, but it wasn't criminal. The article painted a picture of blurred boundaries and poor judgment, but not illegal behaviour, and the accusers sat down for an interview and gave their side of the story.
It was a lot of nudity and sex scenes that I felt were not artistically justified and were added in after the fact.
Looking back, do you feel like you couldn't say no?
No, I could have said no, but because of the power dynamic, this situation was so surreal and I wanted him to like me.
But when you scroll down, the comments were turned off. Even if the public had anything to say in support, we couldn't see it. Still, the accusations had now landed, and they were never going to go away. Franco's reputation was in question, but his career wasn't over, and surprisingly, neither was his friendship with Seth Rogen, because when asked in 2018 whether the allegations hadn't changed anything, whether he'd still work with Franco, Seth didn't hesitate. His answer was simple, yes. And when asked if the claims aligned with the Franco he knew, Seth chose his words very carefully. The truth is that my perspective on this is the least relevant perspective. I'm friends with these people and I'm a dude. All that combined makes me the last person who should be talking about this. It was pretty clear he wasn't defending Franco, but he wasn't condemning him either. He acknowledged the complexity, admitted his limitations, and for better or for worse, stood by someone he had worked with for over a decade. At the time, it felt like loyalty to a best friend. That loyalty wouldn't last forever, because in October 2019, Franco faced the most serious consequences yet. Two former students from Studio 4 filed a lawsuit against him and two of his colleagues. The allegations were serious, that the school wasn't just a place to train actors, it was, in their words, a pipeline for Franco's personal and professional sexual exploitation. They claimed students were pressured into performing explicit scenes, including nudity, under the guise of education, with the promise of roles in Franco's films used as leverage. The suit demanded financial damages and the destruction of all recordings made during those classes. But Franco's legal team denied everything. They called the claims ill-informed and accused the women of seeking publicity, with his lawyer even saying James will not only defend himself but will also seek damages from the plaintiffs and their attorneys. However, in February 2021, that entire stance had changed. Franco and his business partners agreed to pay $2.2 million without admitting any wrongdoing. $67,500 went to Sarah and $223,000 went to Tony. The rest was distributed among other former students from Studio 4 who claimed harm. Franco never admitted guilt, and no criminal charges were ever filed. Like many others in Hollywood, Franco settled not to confess wrongdoing, but to move forward. In a system built on image and reputation, sometimes a settlement isn't about what happened, it's about what can't be proven. And in May 2021, Seth Rogen finally broke his silence. For years he had walked a tightrope, never defending Franco's actions, but never publicly condemning him either. Yet that changed in an interview with the Sunday Times, where he clearly drew a line. I despise abuse and harassment, and I will never cover or conceal the actions of someone doing it, or knowingly put someone in a situation where they're around someone like that. It wasn't just a PR line, it was a public disavowal. one that made it clear he wasn't bystanded by James anymore. Rogen also admitted to regret. He said that the SNL joke he made back in 2014, it was terrible, and that the 2018 interview where he said he would still work with Franco, he walks back on that too, saying that he hasn't and he doesn't plan to work with him anymore. This was a quiet but decisive break, the moment Seth Rogen officially cut ties with a man he once called his best friend. This wasn't just about one allegation, one lawsuit, or one mistake. It was about the bigger picture and the risk of silence being mistaken for support. And later that year, Franco finally broke his silence.
He was asked about me, and I just want to say, I absolutely love Seth Rogen. You know, because I guess I'm talking about because a lot of people come up to me like, oh, I love Seth Rogen. I worked with him for 20 years. We didn't have one fight. For 20 years, not one fight. He was my absolute closest work friend, collaborator. And, we just gelled. And what he said is true. We aren't working together right now, and we don't have any plans to work together. Of course, it was hurtful, in context, but I get it. He had to answer for me because I was silent. He had to answer for me, and I don't want that. It's one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you today, is I don't want Seth or my brother or anyone to have to answer for me anymore.
That line said a lot. Franco understood his silence had come at a cost, not just his image, but his closest friends too. Still, he didn't lash out, he didn't beg for forgiveness, he just accepted it. And to many, that was the moment he finally seemed sincere. In the comments, people pointed out how calm he looked, how stripped of ego he had sounded, someone who had learned, become a better person, and had moved on. And it became even more clear in October 2024 that the situation between him and Seth hadn't changed. The status hasn't changed, and not for a lack of trying. I've told him how much he's meant to me. It was quite clear that friendship, that partnership is now over. And meanwhile, Seth Rogen launched a studio, a creative venture that, in another timeline, might have starred Franco himself. But even now, the question still lingers. Does Seth Rogen betray his best friend? Some say no, that once the allegations surfaced, cutting ties wasn't betrayal, it was survival. And it doesn't make Seth wrong for doing that, but it forces us to ask, what kind of friendship did James and Seth really have? Was it real? Or was it like so many other relationships in Hollywood, only ever real while it was useful?